you very much. May I start by saying you guys have way better QMIND t-shirts than my year ever had. So you're already off to a pretty good start. So I wanted to call this presentation, a history of QMIND and making cool things. So really that's two different parts. The first is really just a walk down memory lane for me, sharing with you some of the history and beginnings of this group that you're now a part of. And the second part is just walking through some projects that I've been a part of. I know this presentation was really marketed as a disruptive technologies talk. They do have to do with disruptive technologies, of which machine learning is, of course, one. And so I hope you enjoy what we have here for you. So as you may know, and as you've heard, a lifetime ago, I started this group called QMIND, and I really want to start with where it all began. When I was in my second year of engineering, at the time, you were more likely to hear machine learning in a pop science news article than you were in any conversations on campus. I was actually involved in a conference at Queen's that was about machine learning. This predated Kukai, and I was in charge of marketing for that conference. So obviously, to be able to sell others on the value of machine learning, I kind of had to understand it, at least in some part myself. And one day I came across this video where someone made a game of Snake that learned how to play itself. I was completely mind blown. The video went on to describe how the weights of the network update, and at that moment, I kind of realized that what really powers machine learning is just a bunch of numbers. What we call the weights and biases. And in technical fields, we deal with numbers just about every day. So what could be so hard about these numbers? I actually scrolled up through many different chats to find the very seed of QMIND. This is the first message I sent to my very smart friend, Marcus, with the idea of it. And I said, to quote, "Yo, next year or late next semester, we should get a group of people together and start a design team that is neural network focused. I've been watching these videos all morning and they are crazy." To which he replied, "I'm so in, man." And then I dropped the most atrocious acronym in the history of acronyms. Very clear that the name came first, and I shoehorned some words in after. It's no wonder we rebranded to QMIND later. So we decided to launch the next semester to strike while the iron was hot. We did the classic on-campus marketing. We posted in all the Facebook groups, spoke at all the classes. And I really attribute this early success to two main things. One was we posted this really long, maybe 20 or so page explainer document that had the long-term vision for the club planned out. And the second is really that machine learning was just hot. And I'll be the first to say that any other club of machine learning likely would have taken off all the same. So in a world where you could do info sessions in person, we had this kind of turnout. We were absolutely stunned and also frankly terrified. But it was not necessarily all friendly faces. We actually had a really skeptical crowd who didn't believe that machine learning could be done by undergraduates. We were asked questions like, "What experience do you have in machine learning?" To which we replied, "None." Most of us didn't even know how to code. We also were asked, "What experience do you have shipping products?" We didn't even know what the term shipping products meant. And I had to clarify right there. For those of you who don't know today, shipping products is really just the process of designing and deploying software to customers. So of course I didn't know this because my only work experience was at a summer camp. But we stuck true to our values. Really at our core, we were a group of students who just wanted to learn machine learning, thought it would be interesting. And we thought that anyone could do this. So at this point in time, we really told everyone that we weren't a team that you would join and be gifted knowledge. We were a team that you would join and earn knowledge by working hard with each other. And maybe at the end of it all, we would have something to show for it. So to help engage a community, the founding team kind of put together this 4-part lecture series that we opened to the public. This was kind of the very first QMIND onboarding series. But this is before we had our team hired. So it was really just anyone who was interested because we wanted people to have a taste of what the club would be like before we actually started. From then we went on to hire a team of about 30 people. This is a photo of that team. A lot of people are missing, myself included. But really what I can say is that we prioritize culture above everything else. We wanted people who could persevere through the difficulty of having to learn machine learning on their own and also have fun while doing it. I would go on a limb to say that that's still the seed of the culture today. I see QMind as a group of people that like to have fun first and also do machine learning second. That year, we did about 6 projects. 3 of them didn't get to training models, my own project included. Some of my favorite projects, one of them was a model trained to recommend recipes based on ingredients in your fridge. My good friend Joey, he got his home IP address banned by allrecipes.com after he scraped 100,000 recipes from their website. That model had a strange tendency to recommend that you make a soup out of milk. Another cool project was an audio-based accent classifier that thought I was Scottish. So yeah, we trained models, but I can't really speak to the quality of results. We presented those 2 projects at the next year's info session. We shared the good, the bad, and all the areas for improvement. And people, I thought, really resonated with that authenticity. It showed that in this small group style, projects were about taking risks, failing, learning a lot, and still coming out smiling. The next year, that was the year that we really blew up. That was the year we grew to over 100 members. We launched Kukai. QMind was really never the same after that, in a good way. And at the end of it all, I really have to say, none of this would have been possible without the amazing friends and peers that honestly believed in QMind. They took on leadership roles, committed a ton of time. They made it their mission to give the community more than it gave them, and that made all the difference. There are late nights. You might recognize your morning speaker, Levi, in this photo. These are the late nights where we stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning to place everyone into their project teams. We spent what little budget we had on pizza because I thought they'd earned it. And there are also some moments where you can look back and marvel at the progress you make. I really think that the QMind community was, without a doubt, the most impactful part of my experience at Queens. And I want to thank you all for continuing to live the QMind legacy. And I know in time, take it in your own unique direction. But we're here for more than just a history lesson. And certainly we're not here just to indulge me in walking down memory lane. So let's get into the good stuff. During this presentation, we'll talk about some of my experiences in disruptive tech. I've done quite a tour of experiences. Of course, machine learning is a very central part. I also did an internship at a quantum computing company. I actually did a talk on that at last year's Camp QMind, and that's on the QMind YouTube page if anyone's interested. Not so much quantum computing in this year's talk. And I also have done some work in crypto. So the 2 projects we're going to talk about is first a project that I did, well, a bit more than a project. It was actually a startup that was based in generative neural nets. And then the second is how I used generative neural networks to launch some NFTs with some of my friends. And I hope that we're not just going to discuss the actual events, but also I really want to get into what this experience taught me. And there are really 2 main lessons I want you to take away. I want to front load this so you can catch the themes beforehand and watch how it all comes together at the end. The first lesson is I want to show you a modern approach for engaging in side projects. I think this approach keeps working on projects fun. I think it keeps them producing results faster than a traditional software development approach. And I also want to talk about a modern style of collaborating. The world has never been more online. It's never been more decentralized. We were thrust into this paradigm of remote work, and that dramatically changes how we get together to work on these projects. So let's get into it. The first experience I want to share with you was a startup I worked on immediately after graduating. This was part of an incubator called Next36, which you may have heard of on social media or on campus. I had just graduated and I really wanted to play into my strengths. So really the only skill I had at the time was machine learning. So right there's a lesson. I could only truly operate within the sliver of the stack that was machine learning. And that's great if I wanted to be a data scientist or ML engineer. But I did lack the ability to, say, deploy that model in a cloud or attach it to a low fidelity website prototype. So that's something we can all take away right off the bat is unless you're certain you want to focus on pure ML, it's good to get experience up and down the stack. But moving on to the startup, we called it Doubly. The core idea is that we would use generative kind of deepfake technology to help YouTubers reach international audiences. We would visually translate their videos. So someone who spoke English could perhaps take their videos to like a Spanish-speaking audience. At the heart of that process, we were using these models called GANs. They basically are good at generating images. And so we would generate new face images frame by frame, put them together, you have a video. And unfortunately, the Zoom gods were not smiling upon us today. So I did have a demo of one of our early prototypes, but I will send that to Max to send you a link after. The audio is not working. The video would be working. What this video really is we take Childish Gambino's kind of freestyle on the left, and we put it onto the YouTuber that we were collaborating with on the right. It's not perfect, but of course, that's kind of what the point of this development process is. I want to give you some behind this. Oh, it's gone. 1 second. Okay. Sorry, just quickly recovering from that. I don't know if you could hear that, but I was hearing some audio. So definitely not a perfect result there, but I want to give you some behind the scenes of what we were doing. As you'll hear again, a core philosophy for this development is just getting that prototype out there. When things are ideas, you can't really hold it and feel it in your hands. But when you put that rough shape of your idea into something more tangible, you learn that so much more. For instance, in the early videos we learned that creating natural looking mouth movements is much more than just recreating the lower mouth. It's about the eyes, it's about the facial expression, and so much more. So with this slide, hopefully these videos are playing. This one on the left is going to show how we used a key point model to kind of track someone's face. This was really out of the box. We didn't do any original work, but we would take those key points and we would put them on to create this mask. And the point of the generative model was that we would train it to fill in the different color-coded areas with what we hoped would look like the jaw, the chin, the mouth, the upper lip. And this worked fairly well for the prototype. And we actually got our initial model from a tutorial online, and that's something I want to encourage everyone to do. This helped us understand how these models are architected. After we learned the basics, we could innovate from there, but we had to get our foundation first. And we all want to try and do the coolest thing, closest to the edge of technology, but that's not always the right place for us to start. You need to have those fundamental understandings first. In the end, we wound doubly down for a number of reasons, which I'd be happy to get into during the Q&A. But I want to unpack the experience and talk about a few lessons for me. In my eyes, there are really 4 takeaways. The first is what really helped us build and learn things quickly was taking advantage of open source. You can find pre-trained models, public data sets, public code bases, and even find people who are willing to educate you online, only if you know how to go out there and grab it. We're trained to think that creating something has to look like a school assignment where you start with this blank page and churn out lines of code and writing, but that's not the way people are building today. It's important to have your own foundation and take care of your education, but after that, it really allows you to stand on the shoulders of giants, look for ways you can add your own unique improvements, and that's how you actually give back to these communities. The second lesson was really that you want to move fast and get to proof of concepts quickly. We would plan out like a set period of sprinting to the next proof of concept, 2 to 3 weeks where we'd commit to a plan. And after committing, we could no longer question the plan. So often we try to tweak the airplane mid-flight, but then your progress just ends up spinning in circles. It's best to build things fast. You want to schedule times to take stock and reflect of your direction, but when you're building, the focus should be on advancing to that next proof of concept. Another big takeaway, machine learning is not a panacea. It is not a solution to everything. We actually had to incorporate computer graphics, things like applications like Blender and 3D modeling to try to solve this problem. We wasted a lot of time trying to shoehorn machine learning into a solution space that it just wasn't going to fit in. So the real problem solving approach is listening to the evidence and kind of making unbiased conclusions and not just trying to work on a technology you think is cool. The last one, and I really want to emphasize this lesson, is I want everyone to do all your work out in the open. One of our biggest mistakes with that startup was we decided to do it in stealth, which basically means you don't announce that you're working on this, you don't have any social media presence, and realistically, the world of startups, the most likely outcome is failure. So you want to get as much out of failure as possible, and that means sharing the journey, talking about the problems you're solving and that you're focused on social media. I want everyone to do this with your projects on QMIND. When you build out in the open, you get credit for all the effort. Usually, we only think about sharing our success, but I want you to think about the journey And I want you to think about how you can share this and kind of create a community that's interested in following that journey that you're going on. So now on to one of my more recent projects. This project, if you've been anywhere near the internet in the last few months, you've probably heard of NFTs. They're basically an extension of cryptocurrencies where instead of blockchain-based money, it's more like blockchain-based art. The tokens that you buy in this case represent ownership of like a JPEG or a video. It's a really interesting space that I've become fascinated by. So back in January of this year, a friend told me that they were also interested in the space. We decided to launch a collection of NFTs. We called our collection Monkey House for no reason other than that the internet seems to love primates. So we committed to making this collection of about 1,300 monkeys. And because none of us had any artistic talent whatsoever, we had to find other ways to create something beautiful. So we used generative machine learning, and we created the following collection. Here's just a few samples. Now, over Zoom, I can't really tell what anyone thinks about these monkeys. If you have thoughts, I'd love to see them in the chat. But I was pretty shocked about the diversity and quality of these monkeys. We generated 50,000 monkeys. So it's not that everyone was a hit, but there was definitely some selection. Our team of 5 spent hours choosing the best ones. We actually had to make a Python GUI that would automatically display the monkey, and you could choose whether to delete it or add it to the collection. And we put these on an online marketplace. We did a marketing push on Twitter. We put about 100 up for sale and nothing. We learned a ton. We had fun doing it. And in the beginning, I was like, these look pretty interesting, but we had no idea that this was going to be the outcome. Our original plan was actually to create realistic monkeys with the idea that someone would want to buy it to own like this fictitious monkey that doesn't exist in the real world. But when we tried doing that, we could just say that machine learning had other plans. Our monkeys looked pretty horrendous. So these are actually some of the more palatable monkeys from the ones that were generated. What we've done is we scraped a ton of images of monkeys. We trained a generative net to make more images, and the result was just absolute nightmare fuel. So what we decided to do was mask the horror of these monkeys by using another machine learning technique known as style transfer. With style transfer, you have the ability to maintain the general structure of an image, in this case, the monkey, and recreate it in the style and color scheme of some other image. So really our pipeline was the process of generating these horror monkeys from a pre-trained GAN and then using a one-shot style transfer model to make their lack of realism look a bit more like intentional abstraction. And I think it turned out pretty well. So same with this project, tons of lessons. This one was super fun, and that was really my greatest takeaway. When we were deciding what to make the collection out of, when someone suggested monkeys, I wasn't so sure because it seemed too silly, but really the silliness of this project ended up becoming its greatness. The fun we had seeped into those late nights. We created our own vision, and we were more motivated to work towards it. That's a lesson you can take into your QMIND projects with when you decide the scope, when you decide the subject matter. I want everyone to be enjoying it because that's just going to keep you in the game longer. Another lesson, which I also can't emphasize enough, is that I want everyone to maintain an active sense of curiosity about basically everything. One of the greatest struggles that we have in trying to navigate our careers is understanding what really interests us. There are things every day that capture our attention. Really, it's about recognizing those moments of curiosity and following up on them. I became really interested in blockchain and Web3, which led me to this interesting corner of the internet where people were making art. I read a ton of articles, I listened to podcasts, and I had at least a little bit of awareness to see this trend coming just a few weeks earlier than other people. And sometimes that's all it takes. I also had the awareness of projects in machine learning, like for applications like style transfer. And those awarenesses is really what made this project work, is that we could say, oh, I know the rough components that are going to contribute to the eventual outcome. And I've said this before in the last takeaway, but I want everyone to leverage existing tools. If you need a lot of blog posts, you should consider using GPT-3. There's a website called ArtBreeder where you can literally pay $20 and have unlimited style transfer models. We use Google Colab notebooks to generate all these images for free. We live in a world of abundance, and all you need to do is know what's out there to take advantage of these great tools. So taking a step back here, it might seem like, I've had this thematic arrow of disruptive technology in my life. It might seem like I'm lucky to know what I want to do, but really, I have to say that the decision to be in this type of technology was really held together by loose logic and fastened by experience that I went after myself. So to answer the question, why am I in disruptive technologies? I generally think that whenever a new technology comes out, there's going to be a lot of churn, and with churn comes opportunity. I will never forget in the first year of QMIND, it was the very first year, people had very little experience, and all of a sudden, people who just had machine learning on their resumes were getting kind of picked up by the companies they worked for and asked what they thought about machine learning. These people were in second year at the time, and the companies that had no conception of machine learning technology were asking them as kind of in-house experts. Another thing is that communities in these disruptive technology settings are often really small at the beginning. Think about how many machine learning engineers there are today, and think about how many there were 5 years ago. Think about how many people are in crypto today. Think about how many people will be in crypto in 5 years. Right now is an opportunity to claim some service area, understand the fundamentals so that you can have that advantage before others. Another just general takeaway from disruptive tech is that institutional signals are often always a lagging indicator. If you're getting into machine learning because you're seeing a lot of job posts, you're probably not in that first wave of early adopters. At Queens, there was no machine learning presence on campus. The year that QMIND started, the faculty had just hired its first machine learning professor, and even that course was only available to third and fourth years in engineering, so it wasn't exactly accessible. QMIND was really a grassroots push, and because it was started by individuals, the culture was focused on making value for individuals. And above all, the main reason that I work in disruptive tech is I'm kind of just fascinated by it. Every day I follow my curiosity, and it makes it feel a little less like work to me. So the question is, did I always know I wanted to do this? The answer is no. There's this great Steve Jobs quote that really encapsulates this. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. We've all heard this, but the second part really brings it home for me. You have to have faith that the dots are going to connect in your future. I was just following my intuition, and I was following my curiosity. I was doing things that made sense in the moment and that I thought would at least be somewhat positive, at least more positive than doing nothing. And just like being in an ice cream store, to pick your flavor, you need to try a lot of samples. Discovering your interest is kind of like being in a maze. At first, you really have no idea where you are, but you have to do something. You have to walk around. You'll run into a lot of dead ends. You might retrace your steps, but it's better than staying in the corner that you know isn't right. Doing something is going to give you more information about yourself and the world. So often, we just try to sit down and think and answer the hardest questions there are to answer. Questions like, what should I do for a living? What drives me? Where do I want to be in 3, 5, or 10 years? These are really hard questions. We end up looking like this guy, the famous statue, the thinker. We spend a lifetime as a thinker. That's going to be a trap. You need to get out there, meet new people, have experiences that spark your interests. We need to be doers. We don't want to sit down and just think. So really, another important part of a main takeaway of this talk is that when you do these projects, you can't do these projects alone. You really need to get the team together. The original years of QMIND, there was an amazing founding team. No individual can achieve something at scale that's great. It takes an entire team that's committed and dedicated and just wants to have fun doing it. For this NFT project, I was just the ML guy, but we needed to find a whole bunch of others with skills that can make the whole project work. Now, probably in this example, Danny Ocean is not the ML guy, but I hope you get the point. So I also want to give you some insight about how teams are collaborating nowadays and why being part of QMIND and the team structure that you have is actually such a good formative experience for what it's like out there in the real world. There's this really great quote from one of my favorite newsletters, Not Boring. The quote talks about this concept of liquid super teams. And I'll read the quote directly. Basically, it says, liquid super teams are like bubbles in a lava lamp. People float in and join forces when it makes sense. They join forces when it makes sense to, and they bounce away when it doesn't. They supercharge the benefits of building something by creating networks of individuals who enhance each other's abilities. University is that ultimate place to meet people who you like to work with and who like to work on the same kind of projects that you do. QMIND is a great environment to practice those skills of working together and to meet the same people. People say it's important to find your tribe. I want you all to find your super team so that when you have that idea, you can get that team together and you can execute, because that's how it's done. It's fast, it takes advantage of open source tools, and people like to see progress in the open. When you graduate, the connections you make in university are going to more or less define your access to talent. It's going to define your worldview. The experience you've gathered is going to basically create your professional identity. So you right now have an amazing opportunity to learn in a safe environment. I'm excited for you. I wish I knew some of this when I was in university. This is all I have for you today. Max Bennett's going to post a link in the chat. This link is basically going to collect some emails. I'm going to send a follow-up. We're going to have some time for Q&A now, but I wanted to give that opportunity in the email if anyone wants to message me privately or ask some questions for a follow-up. So we can open up to Q&A. Thanks for listening to me on my soapbox. I really appreciate it and hope you guys enjoy QMIND. Am I supposed to read things from the chat? I'm assuming.
Yeah, the idea is we'll have people send messages in the chat with questions, and you can just read those off, hopefully. A lot of compliments, but no questions so far. So we'll just wait a few minutes, and I'm sure some will.
Which chat should I be looking at? Oh, Q&A. Got it.
I would say that the regular chat is where everyone's been asking questions so far.
Okay.
But yes, phenomenal presentation, Cooper. As always, you crushed it at public speaking, as you've been known to do so many times in the past. And always a pleasure to have you back, closely linked with QMIND, as always. So I am going to get out of your hair and let you answer people's good questions that
yeah, I'm actually having some trouble finding the questions, so maybe if you want to just read them out, that might be the best way to.
Cool, sure. Okay, I can be the moderator for it. Okay, in that case, okay, first off, question from Ethan, or just comment or request. He was hoping to hear more about what happened with Doubly.
Yeah, great question. I think a better question would be what didn't happen. It was quite a roller coaster. I think we hit about every branch of the tree on the way down. If you're going to do a startup, you want to get as much out of it. So that's a good way to do it. The kind of inciting event was our problem founder fit shifted. And, everyone has kind of heard the term product market fit. Problem founder fit is basically this idea, are you a good team to solve this problem? As we got deeper into the problem, we realized that, as you'll see in that demo when we send it out, machine learning is really just kind of good at filling in the texture of a face, like the coloring, the pixelation, but it was really bad at the structure. We would have like a mouth that would float off a few pixels. The teeth looked like a bunch of marbles, things, you need that structure. And so we were going to need a kind of a graphics, more of a graphics approach. And that actually made 2/3 of our founding team somewhat irrelevant. And with that, it's hard because now you're talking about what do we do? What do we do with the ownership and the effort people put in? We actually almost did like a pre-seed raise, but then we decided not to take it because it just didn't feel like we were right. It felt like we were about to collapse. And so we ended up calling it a day and not taking the money, which is kind of the right thing to do. So that's a quick Coles Notes of the outcome. You're muted, Max.
Okay, thank you, Cooper. Okay, lovely answer. And on a similar vein, Bryson Reed asks, what failure do you think you grew most from?
Yeah, I think the Doubly failure was probably the one where I grew personally the most, and not for reasons where I'm like, oh, I already know a lot more about startups now. Like those are kind of obvious, and you do get those from experience. But that was like the biggest personal failure that I'd ever encountered. I had really built myself up into, my identity being into entrepreneurship and someone who wanted to, be successful at that. And then to kind of fail at that, it left me with this big hole in my identity and self-image. It honestly took me a long time to get over. And that's not to say that I was kind of down in the dumps for months and months, but I wasn't really able to look back on that experience with so much fondness until I kind of forced myself to take that introspection. I talk with a bunch of friends. That always seems to help me. That's one of my that's one of my introspective tools is conversation. So that was probably the greatest failure that I overcame. Was there a second part that was what did it give you, or?
It wasn't asked, but I'm sure it would be appreciated.
Yeah. Okay. I think that it taught me to pick myself up out of those lows faster. It's your internal narrative is such a powerful thing. And if you let yourself have an internal narrative that points downwards, even in the slightest way, you can really lose some opportunities and lose time. And especially when you're young, especially when you're in university, which is very finite time, which you realize when you're done university, you don't want to waste that. And you just want to be opportunistic, believe that there's great things out there in the world to take advantage of, and believe that you can do it. So I don't want anyone to have any other beliefs than that.
Awesome. Okay, for the next question, it's kind of been answered in the chat already, but someone asked and they received 9 likes on their message. Is the Monkey site still up, which it appears to be?
Oh yeah, Monkey House still up. We actually had 3 buys the other day, which was crazy. We had this team chat that was we haven't been using in months, and we were oh, someone just paid $100 for a monkey 3 times. So, crazy world.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, the link just got sent in the chat, so I assume a lot of people will be checking that out.
Check it out. This is not investment advice.
Yeah, of course. Okay, another question here. Adam Farley asks, what advantage has working in startups given you in your role at Microsoft?
Yes, so that's one thing I didn't mention. I'm at Microsoft right now. I would say one of the things with startups is that every day you wake up and you face the hardest problem. If you don't do that, then you don't last long. And when you're in a big company, there's a lot of hard problems, and a lot of people tend to avoid them because they're hard problems. And you can actually get by pretty well solving easier problems or medium problems. But if you solve those hard problems, there's also a strange incentive structure to really hard problems, because some hard problems take years to solve. And if you're at a big company, you probably want to be promoted. And so you want to have something to show for it in a very short amount of time. So there's these long and short-term feedback incentives which are at play as well. I would say if you can just solve the hardest problem you have every day, you will be an incredible employee, and you'll get recognized for that. And also, you have a kind of a fundamental decision to make about who you are, which is, are you the kind of person who solves hard problems for your career? Because if you want to be that person, then you need to start practicing, because one thing that all hard problems have in common is that they are really uncertain. There's no clear guidelines. It's not like the assignment with a rubric. It's just very bewildering. Often things don't make sense. But if you can be good at becoming the person who can decipher that uncertainty, then you can do a lot.
Awesome answer. Yeah, and a really good question too. Okay, another question here from Tristan Ellison. What is the best or most helpful mindset to have when teaching yourself difficult skills such as ML or AI?
Great question. I really think that's kind of what I have tried to bring with me, this beginner's mindset to all these different interest areas. Because that's what these are all just are, right? These are just interest areas. And then sometimes they just happen to become a career. If you can just remember, be kind to yourself. Sometimes you'll be, reading a tutorial or a page and you won't get something. And you're why isn't this making sense? And often you take for granted the fact that you have so much knowledge about other things already. But when you start something new, you need to learn a whole new vocabulary. Machine learning has all these crazy words like backpropagation. Maybe some people here heard that for the first time today. It's don't worry, you'll get that, but focus on getting it and target those foundational building blocks before you then go and try to code, because those building blocks, they're going to come back and bite you if you aren't 100% certain on them. The people who I was with in university, who I just felt were the most intelligent people, one quality they had is like when they learned something, like they made sure they knew it. They don't go back and say, oh, what was that concept that I, spent all that time looking into, but didn't really set it in stone in my mind. You're putting in that investment of learning, like embrace the beginner's mind, be kind to yourself. Don't, jump too far ahead. And also follow curiosity. Like, don't make it a chore, because that's a one-way stop to not, having a kind of a long-term learning approach. So I would bundle all that as the answer to that question.
Awesome. Okay, so another similar question here. So JP LeBlanc asks, what are your favorite resources to learn more about AI or ML?
Yeah, that machine learning mastery website is amazing. Like, it is just pages and pages of code. I often would try to do a kind of conceptual run before I do a coding run. If you do, conceptual run, it's like if you just go straight into the code, you'll end up confused. And then you'll be like, what are all these lines of code? I'm kind of just copying them line for line. What you want to do is get the concepts down, especially with some of the models coming out today's. Just honestly, the models are way more complicated nowadays. Like when we were starting, it was like, what are you going to do with these perceptrons? And it's like basically just like a black box, and you show it data on one end and you like penalize it with a cost function on the other, and it gets better. But now there's like GANs are complicated, attention models are complicated. Get the concepts down so you can like think about it, write about it, understand why the architecture is the way it is before you get to copying those lines of code. And then copy those lines of code. There's no shame in that. It's, you want to understand the architecture, and the best way to do that is kind of build it yourself. A good challenge would be, after you've copied it, see if you can recreate it with like occasional peeks of the answer book. But, I think that's a good place to start.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. Okay. Nick Thorpe asks, how much of a role would advances in ML have if you were to restart the project today?
Which project? The doubly? I'm assuming.
I assume so as well.
How much better can we get these monkeys?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. So, doubly, honestly, another big reason we stopped, which I'm glad that this question came up, is that the open source kind of movement was really eating our lunch. Like we just saw models coming out every day, state-of-the-art research that was like, hey, we can do exactly this. By the way, it's open source. So pretty hard to like charge someone for that if it's open source. So I would say what that would change is now you have this open source approach where you can't just charge people for the service of doing this face translation. It's kind of, that needs to almost like be like a feature instead of the product. So that changed things pretty drastically. And like, it was like a 9-month journey. And from the start to the end of that 9-month journey, we were like, oh, wow, these open source models are getting really good.
Yeah, great point. Okay. Mixing things up a bit with this question, Jacob Saylor asks, who would win, one of each Pokemon or a billion lions?
Lions? Like Mufasa?
Yeah, exactly.
Billion lions. What am I even thinking for? That's like an absurd amount of lions.
It's a lot of lions. That's a good point.
It's a lot of lions.
Yeah. We had some people in the chat responding one monkey as the answer to that question. With interesting take. Okay.
They're on the blockchain. They're forever, right? So
yeah. So infinite lifespan. Okay. Michael Trigus asked, do you have any long-term goals for things you want to do in the ML space?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack with that question, because that assumes also like continued involvement in the ML space.
Yeah.
One of the big takeaways I had from Doubly was that I wanted to switch to being more on the product side after. Part of that experience was because, yes, I was like every day on just like really low level code and building these neural nets, unit by unit. And I was like, yeah, I could do this. I don't know if that's where my heart's at. And especially with that experience, like I was like the technical founder in that startup. I kind of felt like, I also really like presenting. I really like to, strategize and be part of the what you'd call it the product layer, as opposed to like building it. So with regards to machine learning, I think in general, I'm taking a step back to work on product, and that's kind of lets me, be in other interest areas. I do see myself now as someone who I want to write a lot more. that comes from this place where, if you're not building and if you're not someone who can, enable a technology, you better know a lot about the technology and its implications and the ecosystem it's in and what this means for society. And the best way to do that is just to write a bunch, because writing is just thinking. So that's kind of my, I might write. I do plan on doing some writing about, machine learning and Web3 and other interesting areas. So that would be my continued involvement.
Okay, interesting answer. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Tristan Ellison asks, would you recommend any particular methods or tools to develop in the open?
To develop open source, or in terms of like building in the open, that concept, I imagine?
I think it's more the latter. It might be an open source. Maybe Tristan, I don't know if you're still watching, but maybe you could clarify that in the chat.
I can do both.
Okay, let's start with the not open source one, and then maybe if that's what he was going for.
Yeah, I think building in the open is probably what you mean. I would say right now, I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, you're reading all these things on Twitter. There's a lot of LinkedIn posting goes out there. LinkedIn, it's not the best social media, but often like it has a very intentional purpose with what people post about. And you just kind of realize that if you aren't able to put your voice out there, all you're going to do for the rest of your life is consume. And, they call it a creator economy. They don't call it the consumer economy. So you can decide which side of that line you want to be on. And I decided I want to be a creator. And so I want to start writing and I want to start thinking and sharing. And I would say the first step in doing that is getting over this belief that you have nothing to share. You have to understand, like, the experience you have building, you're taking your first step in the QMIND project. There's 100 people on the sidelines not doing that project who would love to hear about your experience doing it, no matter how novice you think it is. You'll find those people by putting yourself out there. And you'll also signal to the world what it is you're working on and leave a trail of breadcrumbs of things that you have done, which is really important, because otherwise you could only share the finished product and you're not guaranteed a finished product, as we've seen twice with my examples. So build out in the open basically means sharing, basically means seeing yourself as someone who speaks to the public and seeing yourself as someone who has things to say. We gotta get over that. Otherwise it's a lifetime of consumption. And, we're all bright people with aspirations, and we deserve to kind of have our voice out there.
Yeah, great answer. Definitely goes like far beyond like what the question was asking. It was like a lot, like pretty applicable to life in general. So yeah, that's some really good advice there. Okay, I think this is like the last one I see rolling in from Dominic Trin. Any advice for a first year trying to break into tech? Our internship something I should be looking at? Which I think applies to like a lot of first years out there. You probably have a similar question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Glad we had some representation from the earlier stages of university, because I know a lot of what I say can seem to be targeted at later stages. When I finished first year, I was like, what kind of skills do I have? In first, I was in engineering. Like the courses you take in first year engineering are kind of just like extensions of high school courses. Like they have the same titles, chemistry and math, like basically calculus. So the first thing is like, you're on this team, and if you have some experience coding, you're going to be ahead of where I was. Like I didn't know how to code. My first year summer, I worked at a summer camp. So you can think of internships if you want to take that professional slant. There's a lot of people who also, kind of use that summer to enjoy themselves. I probably would have had an internship if I could get one, but I couldn't. So my advice in terms of getting one, and this is just general advice for everyone on how to acquire jobs, is, don't put your name on the portals. The strategy is really not to put in 100 applications. Try to find a few people who are on interesting paths that you think you have some shared identity with. This could be someone from Queens. This could be someone who graduated the same program that you did. And you find them on LinkedIn typically. And you say, hey, just stumble on your profile. Obviously, it's not a stumble. It's a pretty intentional search. But I saw you had some really interesting experience. I would love to talk and ask a few questions. I'm a student from X. If you have that shared thing, like, oh, I did this club, or oh, I'm in this program, or I'm at Queens, or I'm Canadian, like I'm in the US now, so I use that. I'm Canadian, so are you. Like, so do that, and just have these great conversations and ask them questions that you actually want answers to. And if you think you've made a connection, and if you did a good job, sometimes they'll just be like, hey, let me know if you're ever interested in what I'm doing. Like that happens maybe 1 in 10 times. That's a better guarantee than any of these applications and application portals out there. And I would also use that as a way to learn what you want to do, because when I was in first year, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was applying for jobs at Cisco because I was like, is this what engineers do? So you find your interest, knowing what you want to do. That's one of the most powerful things that you can discover at this point in your life. I'm still figuring it out. I know a lot of people who, graduate not knowing and not having asked these hard questions. Figure that out and do yourself a favor. Put yourself in the right communities, in the right paths, meet the right kind of people. Just, put yourself out there and, connect. That's kind of how people are. That's the game behind the scenes that you don't see. So, I think I'll give a whole talk on this later in the year, explicitly the first year. So I'll see you there.
Awesome. Yeah. Of note, for any first years listening, we're hoping to get Cooper back in for, I think would be the third or fourth year.
Yeah, it'd be the third year.
Third year of doing a first year crash course on PD related stuff from someone who I had the same presentation from Cooper, but when I was in first year, and it changed my outlook on professional development and career advancement completely. So if you're first year watching this, then please look forward to that. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm just going to send in the form one more time for anyone who wants to get connected with you, Cooper. And if you have any closing remarks, feel free to say them or feel free to hop off, and hopefully you'll get your inbox flooded with a bunch of eager QMinders.
Yes, that's the best case outcome, isn't it?
Yeah.
Last words, just enjoy the time of life that you're in right now. Things change pretty drastically when you graduate. And if you can do a lot for yourself right now, it'll really set you up to solve a lot of the problems that most people experience after they graduate. So I'd leave it there and, just enjoy, have fun, don't take things too seriously, and, stay in touch.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Cooper. Really appreciate you coming back to speak to everyone on QMind, and hopefully we'll see you a few times throughout the year at various events and whatnot.